Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Hayden Locke, who's the CEO of Marimaca Copper, who are a TSX-listed copper miner that have a flagship asset, which is their Marimaca Copper Project in Chile's Antofagasta region, which has the promise to become one of the most significant copper oxide discoveries in recent years. An engineer by background, Hayden is an experienced mining executive with a demonstrated track record in mining and metals, investment banking and private equity and technology, having spent the latter part of his career developing and leading successful LSE and ASX-listed mining companies. Here today, he's going to discuss Marimaca Copper Project with us, how Chile is faring as a mining jurisdiction, what the copper market holds for us, much more. Hayden, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Thanks, Rob. I'm doing really well.
Yeah, great for you to be on. I know you're in Chile at the moment, and your base is the UK. So, for those that may not know you, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners will do, I wonder if you just tell us a little bit about your background, about your career, how your career's developed to what it is today.
Sure. Yeah, I started my career as an investment banker, and hopefully people don't hold that against me. I studied electrical engineering and commerce, and then once I joined the mining industry, I also studied geology just to get a feeling and a full coverage of the technical aspects of mining as I went into it. I wouldn't describe myself as technical, but I know I've had experience in all of the technical aspects. I think I really started my career in mining with a gold company called Papillon Resources, which was a West African exploration story. We made a huge discovery, world class, and took it all the way through the various phases up until commencing construction, and then it was acquired by a Canadian company called B2 Gold. Yeah, that was a real success story, and I've been looking for projects of that kind of quality ever since. I've been involved now with Marimaca for about 4 years. Now, I think it's a really interesting project in a commodity which is fundamentally important to humankind, but one in which there have been very few new discoveries made. And so I had a view that copper was looking very promising from a supply-demand perspective, and Marimaca was one of the few projects that I thought was outside of the hands of a major or needed a major partner to be built. So that's a sort of short and sweet summary of how I've ended up where I am.
Yeah. So I wonder if you just give us some background on Marimaca and obviously why you got involved. I suppose what was special about this particular project over maybe other projects you were potentially considering.
Well, Marimaca is one of only, let's call it 3 or 4 new copper discoveries that have been made globally in the last 10 years. I mean, that is a really remarkable and quite frightening statistic for such a fundamental commodity to our, the way of life that we know. I'd been following it for a while. It was always an interesting discovery. It lacked a bit of scale, but 4 years ago, the 2 private equity owners of the company approached me just to, provide some help with strategic direction. We have this resource. Which way are we going to go? And that's morphed into the current role that I have at the moment. The things that attracted to me, number one, it's in copper. I had a view 4 years ago that copper was changing and becoming more important with the energy transition, certainly in the short to medium term. And in the long term, it is an irreplaceable source of metal for anything that needs to conduct electricity. I liked the idea of the copper thematic and was starting to form a view that I was pretty bullish on copper. What I realized when I was looking around for things to invest in was there are just very few smaller scale copper projects, of which Marimaca is one, in terms of capital costs, but also production. Most of them are dominated by very large porphyry style copper deposits, which carry absolutely enormous capital cost bills and are really only the domain of the super majors, BHP, Rio, and the much larger companies. And so that really made Marimaca stand out to me. I was looking at it and thinking, okay, it's a relatively small resource. It is in an amazing location right next to a port. It has power lines running across the top of it. It's got roads in place. We're not in the high Andes, so it's low altitude. And as a result, I had a view that with all of those infrastructure benefits, it was going to be a very competitive on the capital cost basis. And as we all know, if you're trying to build a mine yourself, capital cost is the first hurdle to clear, is being able to finance your capital cost to get into production. So we put out a study. It confirmed what we thought, which was this is among the lowest capital cost projects in the copper space. What's really interesting, though, is because of its location, it is also incredibly competitive on the operating cost front. And so those combinations mean that the return on invested capital metrics are great, and that this will be a financeable project in the hands of us, a relatively junior company.
So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the Flagship project and where you're up to with things at the moment.
It's located in the Antofagasta region of Chile, which is in the north. It's the biggest copper mining region in Chile, which is the biggest copper producer in the world. So it is a very important producer of copper globally, a deep heritage of mining. The project itself is quite unusual, and it's very unique in so many ways, not least of which is that it's an all oxide resource, which means we are going to be doing a heap leach using sulfuric acid to produce copper cathode, which is about 15% of global copper supply, rather than the alternative, which is the large scale crushing, grinding, flotation to produce concentrate projects, which is dominant in the copper industry. Typically, solvent extraction, SX-EW leaching projects are much lower capital intensity than an equivalently sized copper concentrate project for a variety of reasons, primarily tailings storage. We don't have any tailings storage, which is a huge red flag for many investors these days. But we also don't have a crushing and grinding mill. The infrastructure in general is a lot less comprehensive with an SX-EW project. So as a result, it's significantly lower capital cost. When I first joined, one of the key weaknesses, if you could call it a weakness, was the project just didn't have enough scale to be what I call globally significant. And so in 2021 and 2022, and then, including infill drilling in 2023, we set out to try and increase the size of the resource, and we were very successful. We doubled the size of the resource. So we're now what I describe as at 1 million tons of contained copper across all of the resource categories. We are at the bottom end of globally significant, but this will be a project that we believe can do 45 to 50,000 tons of copper cathode for a mine life of somewhere between 12 to 17 years, depending on the recovery assumptions we take into our definitive feasibility study. So in terms of where we are in our development, we are about to submit our environmental permit applications. It's a huge milestone for any company. That'll take us about 12 months, we think, to go through that process. There are other permits to get after that. And we're about to commence in earnest our definitive feasibility study, or we have commenced it really, which will be delivered towards the end of the year and probably released to the market early next year, which will bring together all of that work we've done in the last 3 years and present what we hope will be a very financeable project to take into construction.
How do you assess the current progress of the Marimaca project, and I suppose what the main challenges you've had to face and maybe looking to face in the future that you know of?
It's going well. We have been a little bit capital constrained until we got an investment from Mitsubishi Corp last year. So I think Mitsubishi Corp is the preeminent LATAM copper investor, and the fact that they invested in us, I think, took the market by surprise. Up until that point, we weren't fully financed to go, aggressively forward in terms of our development plans. We now are fully financed to do that. So things are progressing well. Usual challenges as you get into the detail of a definitive feasibility study. There's a lot of things that come out once you get into the really deep detail in terms of designing a project. But all of the indications point to the same unique characteristics that we outlined in our previous studies, which is low upfront capital cost, strong operating costs, relative to our peers, and therefore very good margins, very good cash flow. And, this is a project that really one of the few copper projects that doesn't need a significantly higher copper price in order to be financed and built. We think we'll have some of the best return on invested capital metrics in the market. The biggest challenges always with every mining project is environmental permitting. It's a challenge everywhere in the world. We see it regularly that, environmental permits are the things that trip up mining companies. So we're very focused on that. for the next phase. We'll be submitting that application, as I said, in the coming weeks. All of the work is done. We're just reviewing everything and making sure that it's all ticks all the boxes and we cover off all the risks that the authorities would be concerned about. And then the second big thing that I'm focused on at the moment is really around people. We are going into a new phase, which is a completely different skill set, completely different mindset, completely different culture. And so we are starting to really look at building out our execution capabilities with senior appointments here in Chile. And, we're being successful. I think Marimaca's reputation and profile is growing, and we are getting more and more approaches from people who are very experienced and have a great track record to come and work with us as we try to build a copper company.
How does the company engage with local communities and obviously stakeholders? And what are the key responsibility initiatives that you are implementing or going to be implementing?
Well, we have a local presence so the only local town that is near our project is the port town of Mejillones. It's about 25 kilometers away. Other than that, we're in the middle of the Atacama Desert where there is absolutely nothing really that can grow. It's certainly not suitable for agriculture. And so really the only local population that we deal with is Mejillones. The next biggest is Antofagasta, which is the regional capital. It's about 45 kilometers away. So we don't really have an impact there. Under the Chilean legislation, so we have no indigenous populations, we have no local landowners. So really our approach to very, very local stakeholders is much simplified. We have conducted a voluntary community consultation process already, which is not required under Chilean legislation. But we've done it because obviously they're important to our future development plans. It was very well received. But we have been based in the community of Mejillones. All of our geologists and all of our workers who work on site are based in Mejillones for the past 10 years or 8 years. So, we are part of the community there. We have a great relationship with various stakeholders in the region, and that's only going to increase as we march towards production. Chile is a very mature mining industry, and it is by far the most developed economy in Latin America. So it is not. I started my career in Africa. It's not the same as operating in Africa, where there is a much greater expectation on new companies to really provide a significant improvement in quality of life for the stakeholders. Most of our stakeholders have a good quality of life already, but there is certainly a focus, as there is everywhere, in making sure that while we develop these resources, that all of the stakeholders that we represent, including our shareholders, benefit from what we think is going to be a great project. So there will be ongoing initiatives. We will base the vast majority of our workforce up on site. That's a company culture and cultural policy that we want to be part of the community rather than fly in, fly out. And given the location of our project, there's no need for us to be fly in, fly out. We can be based in both of those communities.
What are some of the biggest risks facing Marimaca Copper today? And I suppose, how are you addressing them to obviously deliver more value to the shareholders?
By far the biggest risk is environmental approvals processes and just permitting in general, and being able to get through that threshold. I think mining has been maybe not unfairly tarnished, but tarnished by its history and track record of impacting the environment around it negatively. And there have been some very high profile Latin American mining failures, tailings dam failures and things like that. So really we're focused mostly on that for this point in time. That is the single biggest risk blocking us from getting to first production. And so that's taking the most of our time at the moment. We have spent, I think the other thing is a lot of mining companies are so keen to get into production that they tend to rush that process. And the risk of rushing through that process is you're underprepared and you don't submit the required documents and you don't think of all the risks and you don't fully mitigate those risks, or at least show that you have a mitigation plan and a fundamental understanding of the risks that are being faced. And so we've taken our time and done an enormous amount of work and really built the case for why we think this project is going to be one of the leaders in terms of new mining projects coming into the market in Chile and Latin America and potentially the world.
And if we look at the commodity of copper, what do you think the prospects are for copper? And I suppose if we look at Chile initially, but obviously globally and more generally.
Well, it's been I think there's a fairly widely held consensus that there has not been enough money spent, particularly in exploration, to find new copper projects. And I think that's evident in the fact that we are one of only 3, maybe 4 true new greenfields copper discoveries globally in the last decade. And what that means is, as demand increases, which it does as the population goes up, it naturally increases, you need to be finding and bringing on new production. That takes time. And, I think I've seen statistics that are these days from discovery to first production, the global average is about 20 years. So it is a very long gestation period to find a new project and bring it into production. And what that means is at some point in the future, there will be a reckoning that requires some swift movement and aggressive movement from mining companies to try and catch up to that underinvestment in capital. I think what really got me focused on it, and this is more of a sort of 5 to 15 year time horizon, and one of the reasons I think that it is one of the best commodities that we can possibly be investing in, is that we have the energy transition. The energy transition, whether you believe it or not, the train has left the station. Government policies have started to focus on net zero by 2030. You can argue whether or not those goals are going to be achievable, but the policy is what's driving this new wave of demand for copper and other conductive materials, aluminium being one. So I think in this next 5 to 15 year period, we have a real perfect storm of significant underinvestment in copper projects and lack of new supply coming on, and a new wave of new demand, which complements the old world Dr. Copper sources of demand, which are very much the traditional economy. And in that combination, there is a serious risk of a sudden and, I think, very steep rise in global copper prices as the demand significantly outstrips the supply. I think the other challenge is very few new copper mines being built. There are a couple of high profile, Kamoa-Kakula, remarkable success. There's been Quebrada Blanca here, QB2 here, which not such a great success, but is now in production and producing. But there have been very few new copper projects. And in fact, the vast majority of copper projects, especially in Chile, the largest producer, are very, very old. And what we're seeing is mines getting deeper, grades falling, recoveries falling, and operating costs going up. And that can only mean that if we want to keep these mines in production, the copper price has to go up. So one of the statistics that I tell people about when I'm thinking about the copper price in the long term is people say, well, surely the mines can just expand, can't they? Well, the really interesting piece of research out of a group in New York shows that the top 20 mines, which account for about 30 to 40% of global copper supply, need to invest $50 billion over the next 10 years just to maintain production, not to increase production, just to maintain production. Many companies are not willing to do that at this copper price. And so I think there will at some point in the future be, that severe reckoning, and we're pretty well positioned to take advantage of that. Dr. Copper is still very important. So people ask me, why hasn't the copper price gone crazy? Well, we've had globally significant inflation in most of the major economies, tightening of interest rates, raising of interest rates, which has put a dampener on global economic demand. And to be clear, global economic is still a fundamental driver of demand for copper. When that reverses, and we see the Fed, for instance, starting to cut rates, the Bank of England starting to cut rates, the ECB starting to cut rates, I think we will then see a really strong period for copper, which is when you want to be looking at either investing in producers or investing in developers that are going to become producers. And that's where the cupboard is bare. We don't see any groups that are looking to become a producer in the same timeline as us.
Yeah, and that's what everyone's waiting for, that copper price to sort of obviously move up and build momentum. So what is the company's, I suppose, medium to long-term strategy and outlook over obviously a larger horizon?
We are very focused on becoming a copper producer and moving as quickly as we can to do that. And people ask, well, you've got sulfide potential at depth. There's a potential of a bigger discovery at depth at Marimaca, but it won't change our development strategy. And so from that perspective, we're saying, well, investors who are buying our shares now want to see us minimize dilution as much as possible, and then use cash flow in the future to go out and really try to expand. So we're focused on that. We are continuing to explore in parallel. So we're running a dual strategy of development of the Marimaca Oxide project, which is quite imminent. And then also going back to grassroots where we made all the value in the first place with our exploration team out looking for new copper projects in and around our current discovery. The first real priority is complementary oxide resources that can feed into the infrastructure that we intend to build with Marimaca. So we're talking shallow copper resources, within a 30 to 40 kilometre radius of our project. And then as we move further into production and start to get cash flow, we can start looking for the much larger prize. We have a very large land package. We don't have enough resources to currently explore that effectively. And so that would be, we really want to build a copper company and then start to try to become a globally significant copper company.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about the executive management team and obviously the main players within the business, and I suppose what value do they add to the company?
So we have a very strong board. I think I'll highlight a couple of the key members of our board. We have Mike Howarth, who is a chairman of our board, is a managing partner of Greenstone, a private equity fund based in London. He's a significant shareholder in the business and has been incredibly supportive with capital. Two other directors of note in terms of their copper experience. One is Clive Newell, who was a founder and president until recently of First Quantum, one of the largest pure play copper producers globally. He built that company with Philip Pascal from nothing into a $20 billion company. There's somebody who has done it before and has been through all the challenges that we're going through and will go through as we try to build a company. And then the second one to mention is a Chilean national, Giancarlo Bruno, who joined the board relatively recently. He has just retired from executive roles, and his last role was as CEO of Mantos Copper, which sold or did a merger with Capstone to create the new Capstone. In that role, he debottlenecked and expanded Mantos Blancos, which is a heat leach and copper sulfide project in the Antofagasta region of Chile. And then also he built the recently announced and commissioned large expansion of Mantoverde Copper, which is Capstone's flagship project. He's got 30 years experience in copper in Chile. He knows everybody and he's been through this multiple times. So he's been a significant addition to us as a management team and really helpful. In terms of the senior management, obviously myself in the president and CEO role, we have a managing director and CFO based here in Chile. In fact, all of the team, bar myself and one of our financial controllers in Canada, are based in Santiago, which is why I spend so much time down here. Jose Antonio Marino, he was until recently the head of M&A and business development for SQM, the lithium producer out of Chile. He's got a lot of commercial experience and a lot of mining experience down here in Chile across various commodities. So he's been a great addition. And then our VP of exploration is Sergio Rivera, who is a legend in the Chilean mining industry, was the head of exploration for Codelco for many years and has really been the driving force behind the discovery that we've made. There will be announcements coming out in the coming weeks about new project appointments, project directors. So we're really starting to find good people and get our hands on those. So I'd say watch this space as we build the team.
Yeah, no, great team that you've assembled there. And lastly, what are the, I suppose, key milestones for the Marimaca project over the sort of short term, say the next 6 to 12 months?
We want to get this permit application in ASAP because that obviously goes into the system and then it's a process that you have to work through with the authorities. So we expect to be submitting that in the next month, let's call it, which will be a really big milestone for us. Maybe not as exciting for investors, but it's been a lot of hard work to get there. The definitive feasibility study obviously is very important in terms of bringing together all of those disparate pieces of technical work that we've been doing and wrapping a study around it, which shows our investors and potential future investors, well, this is the reason we think you should invest in this project because it's going to make an amazing return on investor capital as we move forward. The DFS is also the kickoff point for our engagement with our financing partners. And in fact, we went out for expressions of interest to the whole mining debt financier community this week, and they've had a really great response already. It's early days. We just want to get in and say, what's the art of the possible here? And then we start to refine our strategy on the basis of that. And so we'll be working in parallel to deliver our debt financing during the course of the next 12 months. And then I think the really big one in terms of milestones for us is we do have rigs on site. We are about to start our next exploration campaign. And that's really about, firstly, finding complementary tons to add on to the Marimaca Oxide project, but also we've got some very large scale opportunities a bit further to the north and east of our project, which we're very excited about. And, that's a different scale of opportunity. But so again, that two-pronged strategy of development and exploration will be really driving our news flow over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. Thank you, Hayden. Really appreciate your time. It seems a busy 6 to 12 months. Hope everything's successful. Hope that an environmental permit gets approved, and you can obviously move forward with the project in sort of timing that you want it to be approved. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions, they want to follow the story, how can they go about doing that? What social media platforms do you both showcase your company and project on?
Yep, we're on X now, as it's called. We're on LinkedIn, and if they go to our website, you can see the contact details of our PR partner in London, who can forward on the emails to me. I typically pride myself within reason on replying to people who are interested. I see it as a really enjoyable thing to talk to investors who are passionate about the mining industry. So that'd be the best way to do it.
Yeah, great. All the best for the next 6 to 12 months. Hopefully you can come on the podcast during that time and give us an update on progress. I'm sure our audience will be interested in listening.
Amazing. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. As usual, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. Obviously, as Hayden's discussed there, copper is an important part of our civilization, but also the green transition that we're moving into, and is needed. It is undersupplied, and what a great project Hayden has just described, and hopefully they will go into production in the near future. Thank you for listening. Please keep sharing to people within our industry, but people outside of our industry also, to improve the branding of mining. So until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.